Deep in the heart of Ashwood National Forest Ranger, Elias Ward thought he'd seen everything, until he found a massive nest built from stripped branches. What he uncovered next would expose decades of buried crimes hidden beneath the trees. Subscribe for more real-life inspired mysteries, and tell us where you're watching from. The dawn crept softly over Ashwood National Forest, a slow unfurling of light through pines heavy with dew. Elias Ward had walked this same trail for 17 years, his boots knowing every bend, every stubborn root that jutted from the earth. He loved these hours before dawn, when mist hovered low and time seemed to pause. He liked the forest's silence, the scent of resin and wet bark steadying him. Routine kept him steady. Out here, he could almost believe order still held. But that morning, something felt off. It wasn't loud or sudden, more a tremor in the stillness, a faint hum at the back of his mind that told him the forest was holding its breath. He slowed, listening. No birds, no chatter of squirrels. The quiet pressed around him thick enough to feel. His fingers brushed against the strap of his radio instinctively. He followed the trail deeper north, where the trees grew older, their trunks gnarled and wide enough for two men to hide behind. The air grew cooler, heavier. The smell of pine sharpened, tinged faintly with something metallic like rust. When he rounded a shallow bend, he saw it a structure crouched between two massive oaks where sunlight barely reached. At first glance, it looked like a storm pile debris tangled by wind. But the closer he came, the more deliberate it seemed. Branches woven tightly curved inward, forming a vast bowl, nearly as tall as his shoulder and easily 10 feet across. Moss draped over it like aging cloth. He stood motionless, breath fogging in the pale air. Elias stepped closer, boots sinking into damp earth. His hand brushed a twig. It snapped too cleanly. He crouched, tracing the intricate pattern of the weave. It wasn't random. It wasn't natural. The branches had been stripped of bark, bent with strength, fitted together with a precision no animal he knew could manage. His years cataloging eagle nests, bear dens, and wolf burrows told him this thing belonged to none of them. It was built. His heart beat louder, steady but slow, like a drum sounding from deep within his chest. He circled the structure carefully, scanning for tracks. That's when he noticed the ground, indented, soft, patterned, with faint boot prints leading toward the creek. They weren't his. The heel marks were sharp, recent. Someone had been here, maybe last night. Elias crouched lower, letting his fingers hover over the impressions without touching them. The stride was long, heavy. Whoever it was had carried weight gear, maybe. But there was no sign of a camp nearby, no smoke, no discarded wrapper or rope. Only those prints. And the nest. When he leaned forward to peer inside, something caught his eye. A strip of fabric half buried beneath the outer rim of twigs, sun-bleached stained. He reached out and tugged it free. It tore slightly as it came loose, revealing a dull metal zipper attached to one end. The fabric was thick synthetic, the kind used in outdoor jackets. He turned it over in his hands. The stain wasn't dirt. It had dried to a darker hue, stiff against his fingers. Blood, maybe, or something close. A shiver crawled up his spine. He rose, scanning the trees. Nothing moved, no wind, no sound. Even the air seemed to hang heavier now. He trusted instinct. The body often remembered before the mind did. Something wasn't right here. Elias took a slow breath and reached for his phone. He snapped several pictures of the structure, the fabric, the footprints. Each click of the shutter sounded far too loud. After a moment's hesitation, he keyed in a note on his GPS unidentified structure, northwest quadrant coordinates logged. He stared at the nest one last time before stepping back. On his walk back toward the ranger station, he kept glancing over his shoulder. He knew this ground by heart, yet the forest felt rearranged watching him go. By the time Elias reached his truck, the morning sun had risen higher, cutting gold lines through the mist. The world looked normal again, ordinary, safe, almost peaceful. But he couldn't shake the image of that massive nest, the deliberate weaving the fabric clinging to those sticks like a remnant of a story no one wanted to tell. He took one last look at the forest before starting the engine. "You've seen everything before," he muttered to himself as if to settle his nerves. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. There were things in these woods that weren't meant to be found, and one of them had just been waiting for him. The rain came softly that afternoon, a fine mist that blurred the tree line and deepened the scent of pine. Elias Ward sat at his desk in the ranger station, the heater humming quietly at his feet. The photos lay under the desk lamp, the nest's weave disturbingly geometric. He leaned closer, running a finger along the edge of one photo, where the strip of fabric appeared faded gray, torn at one side, and still faintly stained. He didn't say it aloud, but he knew no animal built that thing, and no storm could have left such an artifact inside it. He typed the report with military precision. Unidentified human artifact found within non-natural structure. Possible illegal activity. He attached the photo's coordinates and a short note describing the absence of wildlife in the area. Then, after a moment of hesitation, he picked up the phone and called the county sheriff's office. The dispatcher answered with the dull tone of someone halfway through a long shift. Elias explained what he'd found, how large the nest was, how deliberate the weaving looked, how the fabric and boot prints suggested human involvement. "Could be hunters," the man said. "No," Elias replied. "Someone built that for a reason." The dispatcher promised to forward the report, but Elias heard the shrug in his voice. No urgency, no interest. Just another oddity in a long list of backcountry calls. When he hung up, the silence of the office felt heavier than the forest itself. The clock ticked above the door, steady and indifferent. He stared at the phone for a long time, before muttering, "They won't come." He'd seen it before, reports vanished, and the forest buried what the world refused to see. He turned back to his computer, double-checking every line of his report before uploading it to the central database. The progress bar crawled across the screen, then flashed "Upload complete." Hours later, when he tried reopening the database to check the entry in the central system was no longer searchable. For the first time that day, he exhaled, shoulders relaxing slightly. At least it was documented. At least someone would have to look. Outside, daylight faded early. The clouds sank low over the ridges, and the pines swayed gently, whispering against one another. Elias stayed long after the other rangers had gone, the soft clatter of rain tapping the windows like fingers. When the heater finally shut off, the sudden quiet startled him. He took it as a sign to leave. Back at his cabin, he poured himself a cup of black coffee and set the photos on the kitchen table. The images stared back at him. The nest, the fabric, the boot prints that seemed to trail endlessly toward the trees. He traced the outline of one print with a pen cap, noticing for the first time a faint scuff near the toe. It looked like the mark of a tactical boot, the kind issued to law enforcement or forest personnel. His stomach tightened. He had seen that tread before. Before he could think it through, the wind rose outside, carrying with it the hiss of rain. He pushed back from the table and checked the locks on the door, an old habit he had never broken. The power flickered once, twice, then steadied. He glanced at his laptop, still open from earlier. The cursor blinked on the desktop where his report icon should have been. He frowned. It wasn't there. He checked the folder again. Empty. He checked the backup drive. Most of the new files were corrupted with 0-byte placeholders. The screen refreshed itself with a brief flash, and for a moment a message appeared at the corner of the screen, accessed remotely. Then it vanished. Elias stared at the monitor, heartbeat quickening. He wasn't a man prone to paranoia, but he knew enough about systems to understand what that meant. Someone somewhere had entered the network and removed his files. Not deleted by accident, not corrupted, erased, clean. He checked his phone cell signal was gone, but the cabin's satellite modem still showed a live connection. The storm had worsened, thunder rumbling low over the valley. He sat back slowly, the chair creaking under his weight. The old wooden floor groaned as the cabin shifted with the wind. Outside, branches scraped the siding in irregular patterns, like fingernails searching for a way in. Elias rubbed a hand over his face, forcing a breath. He reopened the laptop, clicking through every hidden folder, every directory. Nothing. Even several cached images had been replaced by blank thumbnails. Only a small timestamp in the activity log, 1847 remote session, ended. His eyes lingered on the time, 6:47 p.m. He looked at the wall clock above the window. It read 6:47. Exactly. For a long time he didn't move. The only sound was the rain growing steadier, heavier, like the forest was trying to drown its own secrets. Elias closed the lid of the laptop and stared into the dark reflection on its surface. His reflection looked older, lit by the flash of lightning. Whoever had taken his report didn't want that information anywhere public, which meant it mattered. And that realization, the weight of it settled in his chest like a cold stone. He reached for his flashlight, checked the batteries, and set it beside his jacket. Tomorrow he would go back. Not because he wanted to, but because he couldn't leave it alone now. The forest had gone silent for a reason, and he intended to find out why. Then from somewhere outside, through the hiss of rain, came a faint metallic sound, like a latch closing. He froze, head tilted toward the door, listening. The wind carried no answer, only the slow drip of water from the roof and the steady thud of his own pulse. The storm eased before dawn, leaving behind a pale hush over Ashwood. Elias Ward drove north, with his headlights cutting through the morning mist, the wipers sweeping away the last beads of rain. The forest road shimmered with puddles, and every now and then the truck's tires hissed against the wet gravel. He had not slept more than an hour, haunted by the way his files had vanished and that single metallic click outside his cabin. The thought of staying still felt worse than the fear of going back. He parked where the trail narrowed into brush and stepped out his boots, sinking into damp earth. The scent of wet moss rose thick around him. Everything looked just as it had yesterday. The towering pines, the faint light filtering through, but the air carried a strange, sterile stillness. Birds should have been calling by now, they weren't. He adjusted his pack and climbed toward the clearing. Each step sank softly muffled, like walking through the breath of the woods themselves. He moved carefully, scanning the ground. Yesterday there had been prints, human, clear, leading away from the nest. Now the soil looked unnaturally smooth, as if someone had swept it clean. Elias crouched, touching the soil. The layer of needles and loose dirt had been disturbed recently. The pattern was deliberate. Not wind, not rain. Someone had been here after him. He felt the back of his neck tighten as he stood. His breath hung pale in the cool air. The nest still loomed where it had before, enormous and quiet. From this angle, it almost seemed to breathe with the movement of light. Elias approached slowly, every sense alive. The structure hadn't changed much, but there was something off about the ground around it, less debris, fewer fallen branches. Whoever came back had been careful. He set down his pack and took out his flashlight. The beam cut across the surface of the nest, revealing fine threads of moss and the dark gaps between woven sticks. He leaned closer, tracing the interior. That was when he saw it. A glint of metal half buried beneath a layer of damp leaves inside the lower rim. It caught the light for just a moment, enough to make him pause. He reached in carefully, the twigs scratching his gloves, and pulled it free. A cracked wristwatch, its hands frozen at 2:47. On the back, faint under grime, were 3 engraved letters, JPM. He turned it over in his palm, feeling the chill of the metal. The watch wasn't rusted through. It had been out here only a short while, days, maybe weeks, not long enough to belong to the old relics of the prison camp he'd seen in records years ago. It belonged to someone recent, someone whose name he didn't yet know. He wiped the face of the watch clean with the edge of his sleeve and slipped it into a plastic evidence bag from his pack. He made a note in his logbook, found personal item, possible connection to missing individual. 2:47, stopped time. The sound of his own writing steadied him, gave him the illusion of control. When he stepped back from the nest, a gust moved through the clearing, stirring the branches. It smelled of damp earth and metal. He scanned the perimeter. No movement, no sound of retreating steps. But he could feel the weight of absence pressing down on the place, as if the forest itself had been scrubbed clean of life. Elias pulled his camera from his bag and began taking new photographs. Each shutter click seemed to echo longer than it should. He crouched low for another angle, and for a second he thought he saw faint impressions near the far edge of the clearing, a boot print half faded overlaid by the sweep marks. He followed it until it vanished into the undergrowth. Beyond that, the path dissolved into shadow. Kneeling there, Elias realized he wasn't just dealing with trespassers. Whoever had erased those tracks knew how to move through forest terrain without leaving signs. That required training or experience. His own service background told him that. He straightened slowly, scanning the treetops. Everything looked ordinary, but the silence felt like a held breath. He spoke quietly to no one. "You were here last night." His voice disappeared into the air, swallowed by pine and distance. He waited a moment longer, then turned toward the path back. Halfway there, he stopped and checked the time. His watch read 2:47, the same frozen hour on the one he'd found. He frowned. A sharp jolt must have loosened the contact, or something in the clearing had briefly stalled the movement. He shook his wrist until it ticked again. Coincidence, he told himself. He pocketed the watch bag carefully and began the walk back down, eyes sweeping the trees for movement. Twice he thought he heard something, branches shifting, a low creak, the faint crack of a twig. Each time he turned, nothing. Only the whisper of leaves and the long, patient stare of the woods. By the time Elias reached his truck, the morning mist had thickened into fog. It curled low around the wheels, soft and cold against his boots. He looked once more toward the tree line. The nest was no longer visible through the haze, but he could still sense it there, hidden, waiting. As he climbed into the driver's seat, the radio crackled faintly with static. He lifted it, pressed the side button, and spoke into the empty channel. "Base, this is Ward. I found something new out there. I think someone's been tampering with the site." The only reply was static, faint and uneven, like breath on glass. He tried again. The noise faded into silence. Then through the static came a single, sharp tone. 3 short beeps before cutting off completely. Elias lowered the radio slowly, the sound still ringing in his ears as he turned the key and started the engine, the truck's headlights slicing through the white fog ahead. The fog lingered well into noon, wrapping the forest in a gray stillness that felt almost deliberate. Elias Ward parked farther down the service road and continued on foot, following the faint impressions he had photographed days earlier. The air was heavy, cool, threaded with the smell of damp leaves and rust. His boots made soft sounds against the earth as he moved deeper into a section of the park he hadn't patrolled in years. The trail here was nearly gone, swallowed by undergrowth branches reaching across it, like hands trying to pull it back into the forest's memory. He used his knife to cut through the thicker vines, marking his way as he went. The deeper he traveled, the quieter the woods became. Even the usual murmur of insects had vanished. Then, through the veil of mist ahead, he saw it, a faint shape rising between the trees, angular and unnatural. As he stepped closer, his breath caught. It was a gate. The rusted gate sagged under years of grime. Faded stencils read, "Correctional Camp, No. 14. The sight of them felt like something from another life, an echo pulled up from a forgotten decade. He reached out and brushed away the moss with his glove. The letters were real. The iron beneath them was cold. Elias glanced around. No signs of movement, no footprints in the mud. He pushed the gate slightly and it moved with a long, reluctant groan. Beyond it stretched a cracked asphalt path, leading to a cluster of low buildings half collapsed under the weight of vines. Their windows were shattered, their roofs bowed inward. The air inside the perimeter smelled stale, layered with mold and the faint sweetness of rot. He walked slowly, flashlight cutting through the gloom that pooled in corners. Signs of age were everywhere, rusted bed frames, broken glass, a tattered uniform hanging from a nail. On one wall, faded paint spelled Dormitory C. The place had been built for containment, not comfort. He recognized the utilitarian government-issue design from his service days. Elias crossed into what might once have been the administrative building. The door hung askew, and the interior was choked with dust. Papers lay scattered across the floor, curled and yellowed, brittle to the touch. Filing cabinets stood overturned drawers, pried open, their contents long since rifled through or left to decay. Yet in one corner, a small office door remained closed. The handle gave with a hollow click-ank. Inside, the air was stale, untouched for decades. A desk sat beneath a broken window, its surface buried under folders. He brushed them aside until he found a map pinned beneath. It was a detailed layout of Ashwood and the surrounding territory dated 1973. His finger traced the faint markings, red circles drawn by hand, in several remote areas of the park. One of them aligned almost perfectly with the coordinates of the nest. Another lay in a northern ravine he didn't recognize. The circles were unlabeled, but the pattern was unmistakable, organized, deliberate. Elias folded the map carefully and slipped it into his pack. Then, beneath the desk, he noticed a metal box wedged against the wall. It was heavy, its hinges fused by rust, but after some effort, he pried it open with his knife. Inside were folders sealed in clear plastic, still legible. The labels read, "Inmate Records, Camp 14. He sat down his gloves, brushing the first folder open. Each page listed a prisoner number, name date of intake, crime, and status. But where there should have been release dates, there were only blank lines, row after row. The last few pages bore red ink notations beside certain names, notations that read transferred external program. In smaller handwriting, almost scrawled, were words that made him pause. Field, biological trials, site verified. The ink bled faintly through the paper as though written in haste. His stomach tightened as he flipped through more entries. Every transfer listed a date, but no return. Some names appeared twice marked with the same red script. A few were circled entirely as if chosen. He turned to the last file, its edges darkened with age. Inside was a typed memo, the letterhead bearing an old federal insignia. The text referred to experimental adaptation under isolated ecological control, authorizing continued data collection off-site. There was no signature, only an initial D. The words blurred for a moment as he read them again, slower this time. Field biological trials. He whispered the phrase aloud, hearing how absurd it sounded in the silence. Elias set the papers down, staring at the mildew-stained wall ahead. The faint hum of wind through broken windows filled the room, low and hollow. He felt a tremor in his chest, the same instinct that had guided him years ago in darker places. This wasn't just a derelict camp. It was erased, hidden, and the records weren't meant to survive. He picked up one of the folders again, scanning the intake, years 1969, 1970, 1971. None of them had closure. None of the inmates had been logged out. His hand brushed across the final page, where a faint watermark had begun to show through the paper, a government seal half faded by moisture. He took a photograph of it, the flash briefly illuminating the room. For an instant, the light caught on something metallic in the far corner, a plaque mounted crookedly on the wall. He approached, brushing the dust away. It read, Camp No.14, operated under Federal Forestry Corrections Joint Research Annex. His reflection shimmered faintly in the corroded metal. The date beneath it had been scratched out completely. Elias backed away, pulse thudding. He looked toward the door, half expecting to hear footsteps outside. But the camp was still unmoving, held in the quiet grip of its own decay. He shut the folder, slid it into his pack, and stepped back into the mist. Somewhere in the trees, something creaked, a sound like wood bending under weight. He froze, listening. Nothing followed. His flashlight flickered once, the beam catching the outline of an old warning sign nailed to a pole near the entrance. The lettering was faded, but two words were still readable. Authorized personnel. He stared at them for a moment longer, the rain beginning to fall again, thin and cold, before turning toward the path that would take him back through the forest. The drive back from the old camp was long and silent, the truck engine humming softly beneath the low growl of distant thunder. Elias Ward kept glancing at the rearview mirror. though the road behind him was empty. The files in his passenger seat shifted with every turn, the papers whispering quietly inside their plastic covers. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had taken something that didn't want to be found. When he reached his cabin, dusk had already settled over the valley, the forest turning to a dark mass that seemed to breathe against the horizon. He parked, killed the engine, and sat for a moment listening to the rain begin again. The air was cool, clean, and sharp, yet it carried a faint metallic scent like wet iron. He stepped out, boots crunching on gravel, and climbed the steps to his porch. That was when he saw it. Something pale wedged in the crack of the cabin door. A folded piece of paper damp around the edges. He stared at it for a long second before reaching down. The handwriting across the front was blunt, written in thick strokes of black ink. "Stop looking." The words sat heavy in his hand. He opened the door slowly, the hinges creaking in the quiet. Inside, the air was colder. The lock was still latched from inside Dot, the windows too untouched. Whoever left the note hadn't forced their way in. They hadn't needed to. They'd been close enough to slide it through the door and walk away. Elias set the paper on the kitchen table, his pulse a slow, steady thud. He glanced toward the small shelf near the door where his security monitor rested, its screen dark. He crossed the room, switched it on, and waited as the feed blinked to life. 4 feeds blinked to life: porch, yard, trail, clearing. At first, everything was still. Then he rewound the footage to the afternoon hours while he'd been away. The images played in dull grayscale. The forest stood unmoving under the gray sky, the wind stirring the trees occasionally, then at 5:42 p.m. motion. From the edge of the clearing behind the cabin, a figure appeared distant and half obscured by branches. The camera's sensor adjusted, bringing the shape into focus. A person stood just beyond the tree line, facing the cabin directly. They didn't move. Not for seconds, but minutes. Elias leaned closer to the screen, his reflection ghosting over the image. The figure's face was impossible to see, clearly hidden by shadow and distance, but the outline was unmistakable, broad shoulders tall, wearing what looked like a ranger's uniform. He scrubbed the playback forward. The figure remained there, unmoving, watching. At one point, a flicker of light, like a flashlight, glinted near their side, then vanished. The person shifted slightly, took one step closer, then turned sharply and disappeared into the trees. The feed continued recording for another hour, but nothing else moved. Elias sat back slowly, his hand resting against his mouth. His first thought was of another ranger, maybe a colleague from another district. But there were no scheduled patrols in this sector tonight. He would have seen them on the duty roster, and if someone had been there officially, they would have made contact. This was deliberate. He replayed the clip again, slowing it down. In one frame, the camera caught the glimmer of a badge pinned near the figure's chest. The light was faint, but it was there. The same design, the same insignia he wore every day. The realization hit like a drop of cold water down his spine. Whoever was watching him wasn't just familiar with his work, they were part of it, or had been. Elias switched off the monitor and stood in the dim cabin, the silence thick around him. He could hear the wind move outside, brushing through the trees. Every few seconds, a branch tapped lightly against the roof. He crossed to the window and peered out. The forest stretched in a dark sweep beyond the clearing, the fog hanging low like smoke. His flashlight beam cut a narrow path through the mist, landing on the tree line. For a heartbeat, something reflected back, a flash of glass, maybe metal. Then it was gone. He held the light steady, scanning the edge of the woods. Nothing. He lowered the flashlight, his jaw tightening. Whoever had been out there had moved quietly, professionally. No broken branches, no hurried prints. He had trained people to track, and he knew the kind of discipline it took to leave nothing behind. That meant whoever this was knew how he moved. He went to his desk, pulled open the bottom drawer, and took out his service pistol. The weapon was old, but clean, maintained out of habit more than need. He checked the magazine, loaded it, and set it beside the radio. The cabin's clock ticked steadily in the silence. 6:23 p.m. He looked at the folded note again on the table. The ink had bled slightly from the moisture, but the words were still clear. Stop looking. It wasn't a warning, it was an instruction. He imagined the hand that had written it, steady, confident, unhurried. This wasn't some passing threat. It was personal. He pulled his chair closer to the monitor again, watching the feed in real time now. The forest looked the same, still and patient. Yet every few minutes his eyes caught something at the edge of the frame, a subtle shift in light, a darker shadow between the trees. It could have been wind, it could have been nothing, but his instincts, sharpened by years in uniform, whispered otherwise. Rain thickened on the roof, rhythmic, but never calming. He sat near the window watching the forest, the flashlight resting on his knee. At 8:02 p.m., the motion sensor blinked once, then twice, and a faint light flickered near the far edge of the clearing. One brief flash of a beam cutting through the dark, then vanishing again. His breath caught. The forest outside looked utterly black, now its shapes blurred by rain. He raised the flashlight, aiming it out the window, and waited. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, somewhere out in the dark, the same light flashed once more, closer this time, before dying completely. The morning broke with a thin, colorless light spilling weakly through the mist that clung to the treetops. Elias Ward stood outside his cabin, adjusting the strap of his field pack. The note still lay on the table, inside its words burned into his mind. Stop looking. He had considered it just walking away, letting the forest keep whatever it was hiding. But the thought of that figure in the ranger's uniform watching from the tree line had made the decision for him. Whoever they were, they wanted him afraid. That alone was reason enough not to stop. He drove out before dawn, the headlights carving narrow paths through the fog. At the first clearing, he set up a motion-triggered camera, the same kind used for wildlife surveys. 2 more went up along the ridge overlooking the old camp's perimeter. He made sure to hide each one carefully high in the branches, shielded by bark and moss. Years of field work had taught him how to leave no trace, but as he secured the last bracket, a thought crossed his mind that unsettled him. If someone was already tracking him, they'd know where to look. He tried to dismiss it, yet the thought followed him down every path. By late afternoon, he returned to check the feeds. The first 2 cameras worked fine, showing the forest as it had always been, motionless, patient, quietly waiting. But when he opened the 3rd feed, the screen stayed black. He frowned, tapping the receiver. No signal. He hiked back out to the ridge before sunset, moving quickly, but cautiously. The air smelled faintly of wet iron again, and the fog was beginning to roll back in from the valley. When he reached the tree where he'd mounted the last camera, he stopped cold. The camera was gone. Only the metal bracket remained twisted and hanging by a single screw. The bark was scuffed, as if someone had climbed up deliberately to remove it. Not animals, not wind. Someone had known exactly where it was. They had been watching longer than he thought long enough to predict his setup points. Elias took a slow breath, his pulse steady but rising. He scanned the woods for movement. Nothing stirred, except the mist sliding between trunks like slow smoke. He backed away, leaving the broken bracket as it was. Whoever had taken the camera knew how to move without leaving tracks, and that knowledge unsettled him more than the theft itself. That night back in his cabin, he unfolded the old map again under lamplight. His eyes drifted to the remaining red circles. One of them lay farther north than the rest, near an unmarked ridge. He had never patrolled there. The terrain was too steep, too forgotten. He checked his GPS coordinates twice before deciding. If the camp had been real, maybe this place was too. He left before dawn the next day, heading north on foot with only his pack camera and flashlight. The forest grew denser, the ground soft with decades of fallen needles. For hours, the trail was nothing more than a ghost of a road half claimed by roots and mud. Then he saw it, a faint outline ahead, low and rectangular beneath the weight of ivy and moss. As he drew closer, the shape sharpened, a building squat and windowless, its walls streaked with black mold. A faded sign above the doorway read "Medical Facility, Restricted." The The letters had nearly vanished, but they were still legible enough to chill him. Inside, the air was thick, sour, with the smell of decay and rust. His flashlight beam swept across rusted gurneys and metal tables. Drawers lined one wall, their handles corroded, their surfaces etched with grime. He pulled one open. A morgue drawer creaked out long and narrow. Inside lay a torn plastic lining, empty now, but dark stains still clung to the edges. Each drawer reeked of mildew and something older that tightened his throat. He took a step back, his light catching on a shelf stacked with black bags neatly folded, the kind used for bodies. His hand trembled slightly as he picked up a notebook resting beside them, its cover warped with moisture. The pages inside were brittle, handwritten in a hurried scrawl. Transfers at night, off-site processing. The words repeated across several entries, followed by initials and dates. He flipped through page after page. Each note ended with the same mark, a red line drawn beneath the word processing. The realization struck him slowly, heavily. Off-site processing. Not relocation, not our treatment, disposal, burial, erasure. This wasn't a facility for healing. It was where things were ended and hidden. He shoved the notebook into his pack. He shouldn't be there. Just as he turned toward the exit, a sound echoed faintly from somewhere deeper in the building, the soft scuff of a boot against concrete. He froze, the flashlight trembling in his grip. Another step followed, closer this time, then another. The beam caught movement, a shadow gliding past the far doorway. Elias ducked behind a metal shelving unit, breath caught in his throat. Two figures entered the corridor, their footsteps synchronized, measured. They wore dark clothing masks covering their faces, gloved hands holding clipboards and small lights. One carried one of the same black bags stacked on the shelves. They moved with practiced efficiency, opening one of the drawers, unzipping the bag, and checking its contents. He couldn't see what was inside. The other took notes quickly, his pencil scratching softly against paper. Elias pressed himself deeper into the darkness, the metal cold against his back. He didn't dare breathe. The light from their flashlight slid across the floor, brushing the edge of his boot before moving away. They spoke briefly in low voices, too muffled to make out the words. One of them paused, turning slightly as if listening. Elias's pulse thudded in his ears. The man's head tilted toward his hiding spot, the beam of light beginning to swing his way. Then, from somewhere down the hall, a loud metallic clang echoed, distant but sharp. Both men turned toward the sound instantly. Without a word, they zipped the bag, gathered their equipment, and left through the opposite corridor, their footsteps fading into the building's hollow silence. Elias waited several long minutes before moving. When he finally stepped out, his hands were still shaking slightly. The air smelled stronger now, chemical metallic. He took one last glance at the empty drawer they'd opened, then at the doorway where they'd disappeared, before turning and making his way out into the night. The forest greeted him again with its terrible quiet, the mist curling low around the doorway like breath from something that wasn't supposed to wake. The first drops of rain began to fall as Elias Ward stepped out of the abandoned facility, the cold air rushing to fill the space behind him. The trees loomed close and black against a dimming sky. His flashlight flickered once before settling into a weak, narrow beam. The forest floor was slick, the smell of wet soil and rot thick around him. He moved quickly but carefully, each step deliberate, his breath shallow. Behind him, the old building stood silent, its doorway yawning like an open wound in the hillside. He didn't look back. His boots slipped once on the mud, sending a jolt through his knee. He steadied himself, gripping a low branch, and kept moving. He reached into his jacket to check the camera that had captured the facility's interior. It was still warm from recording its memory card, his only proof. Then from behind him, a faint sound. A door creaking open, voices. He froze, his pulse quickening. The light from his flashlight trembled across the trees. A single word drifted through the rain, low and indistinct but unmistakably human. He crouched low, heart pounding, and switched off the light. The forest plunged into blackness. He could hear them now, their steps cautious but steady, moving down the same trail. Elias eased backward, careful not to break twigs or rustle the leaves. He turned and started to move downhill, each breath short and measured. For a while, he thought he might have lost them. Then his boot caught on a root hidden under the wet leaves. The camera slipped from his hand and hit a rock, the metallic clatter slicing through the night like a signal flare. He froze. The noise echoed once, then died. For a second, nothing. Then the footsteps quickened. He could hear them running now. He grabbed the camera and sprinted, branches slapping against his arms, rain blurring his vision. The beam of a flashlight flared behind him, slicing through the dark. Ward. The shout came sharp and clear, cutting through the rain. He stumbled mid-stride, the sound hitting him harder than the storm itself. They knew his name. Whoever they were, they knew exactly who he was. He pushed harder, lungs burning the flashlight, swinging wildly in his grip. The forest blurred into streaks of black and gray. The ground dipped suddenly, and he slid down a muddy slope, catching himself on the roots at the bottom. Above him, light flashed again through the trees, closer now. The voices followed, two of them, one calling orders, the other moving fast. Elias crawled low, pushing through the undergrowth until he reached a fallen log, wide enough to hide behind. He pressed himself against the damp bark, his breath ragged. Rain streamed from his hair and coat. The footsteps slowed near the ridge. He could hear the men talking, muffled but tense. One said something about retrieval. The other replied with a single word that made his skin crawl, terminate. A beam of light swept across the log, passing just inches above his head. He held his breath until the light moved on. Then he waited, counting the seconds until their voices began to fade again. When the forest finally fell silent, Elias moved. The trees became a blur, the rain a sheet of sound. His legs ached, his chest burned, but he didn't stop. Every flash of lightning showed him a path brief and uncertain before the darkness swallowed it again. Time lost meaning. The world narrowed to the rhythm of his breath and the pounding of his boots against mud. At one point he thought he heard them again, the faint echo of pursuit, but he couldn't tell if it was real or the echo of his own terror. He tripped over a rock, fell hard, and rolled through the wet brush. The impact knocked the air from his lungs. He lay there for a moment, gasping, tasting blood in his mouth, the rain pouring over his face. When he finally rose, the flashlight was gone. He left it. Light would only betray him now. He moved by instinct, guided by the slope of the land and the memory of old ranger roots. Every sound made him flinch, the crack of a branch, the low groan of a tree bending under wind. But no voices followed, only the endless rain. Hours later, when the storm had softened to a steady drizzle, Elias stumbled out onto the edge of a familiar clearing. The outline of his cabin emerged through the fog, dim and ghostly. Relief surged through him, weak, but enough to carry him forward. He reached the porch, dripping and exhausted, and bent to catch his breath. That was when he saw them, two faint arcs of tire tracks pressed into the mud near the steps. His truck had been parked miles away, and no one else used this road. He straightened slowly, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved. The forest looked ordinary, indifferent. But he knew better. Someone had been here. He pushed open the cabin door. Inside the monitor that should have shown his security feed was dark. Its power cord had been severed cleanly near the base. He flicked on his backup light and swept it across the room. Nothing seemed touched, yet everything felt wrong, like the air itself had been disturbed. His hand shook slightly as he locked the door behind him. Water dripped from his coat onto the floor, marking small, dark circles. He took the broken camera from his pack and set it on the table beside the pistol. For a long moment, he simply stood there, listening to the rain tapping against the windows. Each drop a reminder that the silence outside wasn't safety. It was waiting. The rain had not stopped when dawn crept pale over the horizon. Elias Ward sat at the kitchen table of his cabin, the damp air heavy with the smell of coffee gone cold. His hands trembled faintly as he sorted through the evidence laid before him, the photographs of the nest, the map marked with red circles, the pages taken from Camp 14's files, and the damaged camera that had captured what little proof remained. Outside, the forest still whispered with the same secretive quiet, but inside the walls felt smaller, closer, as if the cabin itself were holding its breath. He knew he couldn't stay silent any longer. There was one person who might still listen. He turned on his laptop and waited as the screen flickered to life. The connection was weak, the signal pulsing in and out, but he managed to open his email and type the name Clara Hensley. She had once written a series of articles about the missing persons cases surrounding Ashwood in the 70s, stories that most dismissed as rumor. Elias had read them years ago, long before he ever found the nest. She was independent, stubborn, and had a reputation for chasing what others refused to see. He typed quickly, attaching photos, scanned files, and the marked map. His message was short. "Clara, this concerns the disappearances you investigated. I found physical evidence. They covered it up. Please verify the names in the attached files. Do not share until we speak." He hit send and watched the progress bar creep across the screen. When it flashed message sent, he leaned back, exhaling a long, shaking breath. For the first time in days, he felt the faintest sense of control. Hours passed as the storm pressed against the cabin walls. He checked his watch, 9:13 a.m. Then the notification sound startled him. A reply. He opened it quickly and tried calling the newsroom number he had for Clara, but the line routed to a generic voicemail he didn't recognize. "Elias, I read everything. Some of these names..." The message paused there. Before continuing, "They match my old notes. You need to be careful. At least 3 of them were connected to a case involving local officials, people who disappeared after reporting corruption. I'll explain everything tomorrow. Meet me in town at 10 a.m. at the diner near the gas station. Don't bring the originals. Copy everything." The email was signed simply Clara H. He read it twice, the words sinking in like cold water. The files weren't just old records. They were evidence of something systematic, something buried for decades. People had vanished not by accident, but by design. Elias printed the email, folded it, and slipped it into his pocket. He began transferring the data onto a separate drive, checking each file as it copied. Halfway through, the screen froze. The transfer bar stopped moving. He frowned, tapping the keyboard. Nothing responded. Then slowly, the folder he had been copying from began to empty. Files blinked and vanished one by one until the folder stood bare. The mouse cursor stuttered across the screen, then froze entirely. The internet icon flickered off, on and off again. Elias felt the unease rise in his chest. He reopened the email application only to find his message to Clara missing from the sent folder. He checked the backups. Gone. Even the printed copy had started to feel like a fragile thread connecting him to proof that was already dissolving. He unplugged the laptop and stood pacing the length of the cabin. Someone was inside the network. They weren't erasing evidence, they were intercepting it. Every word he'd sent, every photo, every file, had passed through a pair of unseen hands before reaching its destination. But had Clara actually received it? Or had the response been faked? He glanced again at the printed email, reading the phrasing carefully. There was something strange about the tone. Formal, almost mechanical, lacking the urgency of a journalist who had uncovered something this big. His stomach turned. He sat back down, reopening the terminal, searching for connection logs. The screen blinked with a string of unfamiliar IP addresses, foreign random shifting every few seconds. Whoever was doing this knew exactly how to hide their trail. Then the cursor moved on its own, sliding to the bottom of the page and closing the window. Elias froze. His hands hovered over the keyboard, not daring to touch it. The cursor opened the recycle bin, highlighted the last folder, and deleted it. A chill ran through him as he yanked the power cable free. He unplugged the laptop. Rain tapped the roof as his reflection stared back from the black screen. He could almost feel the weight of whoever was on the other end watching through the same channel he'd been using. He rubbed his temples, forcing himself to think. If Clara's message was real, he had to meet her. If not, someone wanted him to walk into that meeting for another reason. Either way, he couldn't risk staying here. He began gathering the physical evidence, the printed photos, the original map, the pages from the files, tucking them into a waterproof envelope. His hands were steady again now, guided by the same calm that came over him during his military years when panic served no purpose. As he worked, a sound rose faintly over the rain, the low growl of an engine approaching on the dirt road. He froze, every muscle tightening. The hum grew louder, then slowed. Headlights flashed once through the window, a brief sweep left to right like a search pattern before the lights clicked off. Elias ducked behind the curtain, heart hammering. The light stayed on for several seconds, then cut abruptly, leaving the forest in silence again. He waited, listening. No doors opened, no voices followed. Just the slow hiss of the rain returning to fill the space where the sound had been. The forest was still dark when Elias Ward left his cabin, the last traces of rain dripping from the eaves. His pack felt heavier than usual, though it held only the essentials: the hard drive sealed in plastic, the original map folded tightly, a few printed photographs, and his old service pistol. He locked the cabin behind him, pausing for a moment on the porch. The woods were silent, too silent for dawn. He adjusted his coat collar and started down the narrow road leading toward the main trail that would eventually connect to the highway. The sky was turning a dull gray, and fog coiled low between the trees. Each breath came out as mist. He moved quickly, checking his watch, 6:12 a.m. The meeting with Clara was at 10. If he made good time, he could reach town before anyone noticed he was gone. The truck engine hummed softly beneath him as he turned onto the gravel road, the tires kicking up thin trails of dust that vanished into the fog. For a few minutes, it felt almost normal, just another patrol through the woods he had spent his life protecting. Then, as he rounded a curve near the old ranger post, something shifted ahead, a shape in the mist. He slowed the truck, squinting through the windshield. It was another vehicle, a pickup parked sideways across the road. No license plate. The lights were off. His instincts flared instantly. He killed the engine but kept his hand near the gearshift. Two figures emerged from the fog silhouettes against the pale light. They wore unmarked green field jackets with clipped badges that looked official at a glance, but something about the way they moved set him on edge, too deliberate, too synchronized. One raised a hand in greeting. The other rested his on his belt, where a sidearm hung. Elias's pulse quickened. He recognized them immediately, the same two men from the medical facility, the ones in dark masks. Only now their faces were uncovered. "Morning, Ranger Ward," the taller one called out. His voice was smooth, practiced. "We need a word." Elias opened the door slowly, but didn't step out. "You're a long way from your assigned sector," he said. The man smiled faintly. "We're not here for patrol. We're with the Department of Homeland Security. This is a controlled area." "You've accessed restricted property," the taller one said, flashing a wallet badge without a visible number. The acronym DHS hit him like a stone, but something in the tone didn't fit. It was too rehearsed, like a line learned for performance. "Show me your credentials," Elias said evenly. The second man stepped closer, hand still resting near his weapon. "Not necessary, sir. We just need the materials you removed from Camp 14. Elias tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "I don't know what you're talking about." The taller man sighed, taking another step forward. "You were seen entering the site 2 nights ago. We're cleaning up what's left of an old project, that's all. Hand over the items and you can go home. No harm done." Elias's eyes flicked to the badge pinned on the man's chest. It bore the correct emblem, but lacked a serial number. His throat went dry. They weren't DHS or Rangers. "You're not law enforcement," he said quietly. The man's smile thinned. "We're problem solvers, Ranger. Don't make yourself one." The sound of rain began again, faint and rhythmic against the hood of his truck. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Elias reached for the key, twisting it hard. The truck roared to life, and he slammed it into reverse. The taller man shouted, reaching for his weapon, but before he could draw, Elias jerked the wheel and backed into the ditch tires, spinning mud. He abandoned the truck, grabbed his pack, and ran into the trees. Behind him came the sound of boots and shouting. "Ward, stop." The voice echoed too close. He pushed harder, lungs burning as branches tore at his coat. The forest blurred past in streaks of gray and green. He slipped downhill, catching himself on a low branch. A gunshot cracked through the air, distant but sharp. He didn't look back. The echo of his name followed him through the trees. After what felt like hours, the forest began to thin. His legs trembled from exhaustion, but he kept going until he reached a shallow ravine where an old rock formation jutted out of the slope. Beneath it was a narrow hollow, half hidden by ferns and moss. He crawled inside the space, damp and cold, smelling of earth and stone. There he stayed, listening to the forest breathe around him. Once he heard footsteps pass nearby, voices murmuring in low tones. He couldn't make out the words, but he recognized the cadence of authority, the kind used by men who expected obedience. He waited until the voices faded before moving again. The sun was already high when Elias emerged from the hollow. His muscles ached, and every part of him was caked in mud. He drank from his canteen, wiped his face, and began walking. 10 miles stood between him and the town. The trail was long, winding through slopes slick with rain, but the thought of Clara waiting kept him moving. By the time the first rooftops appeared through the haze, afternoon light had broken through the clouds. His watch read 12:37 p.m. He hurried down the main road, heart heavy but hopeful. The diner sat at the edge of town, just as Clara had described, a weathered building with blue trim and a single neon sign that flickered weakly. A police car idled nearby, its lights off. Elias slowed, scanning the parking lot. Only 2 vehicles sat there, neither belonging to Clara. He stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the dim interior. The smell of coffee and bacon lingered in the air. A waitress looked up. "Coffee?" she asked. "I'm meeting someone," he replied. "Clara Hensley." The woman frowned. She was supposed to come in this morning. Never showed. The words sank in slowly. Elias thanked her and stepped back outside the sunlight, suddenly too bright. He sat on the bench by the diner, staring at the passing cars, trying to steady his breathing. Hours later, he would learn what had happened: a car fire on Highway 42, a single driver, no survivors. The vehicle had matched the make and model of Clara's. Witnesses said it had veered suddenly off the road before bursting into flames. The official report called it an accident. Elias knew better. 3 days after the crash, the morning broke with a gray stillness that felt more like morning than calm. Elias Ward stood beside a payphone on the outskirts of Ashwood, a paper envelope clutched tight beneath his coat. The envelope held the hard drive, his last piece of evidence, the one copy he hadn't dared send electronically. His eyes were bloodshot, and his hands bore small cuts from days spent walking through brush and stone. He'd barely slept. The local paper had already printed news of Clara's accident. The word haunted him. He read the headline, folded the paper, and walked away. Now, as the payphone buzzed faintly in his ear, he spoke the name of the only person left who might still take the risk. "Jonathan Pike," he said quietly. "The drive is yours if you promise to make it public." The man on the other end, a veteran journalist with a reputation for burning bridges, agreed without hesitation. They met 2 hours later at a rest stop just beyond the old county line. The air smelled of wet pine and gasoline. Pike was cautious but resolute. He took the envelope, checked its contents briefly, and looked at Elias with a kind of quiet respect. "You know what this will do," he said. Elias nodded. "I just want it to be seen." Pike placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then it will be." Pike drove off without another word. By evening, the first reports broke nationwide. The headlines rolled across screens like an avalanche human experimentation site found beneath National Park. Ashwood scandal tied to decades of missing persons. Federal investigation opens into unmarked burials. Helicopters hovered over excavation sites as hazmat teams combed the wet soil. Reporters spoke of graves of record spanning 50 years of a classified biological program that had vanished from archives sometime in the late 70s. The discovery shook the country. Elias watched it all from the edge of the crowd that gathered beyond the cordon tape. Cameras flashed, voices tangled, and the hum of generators filled the air. The forest, once so silent, now throbbed with machinery and human urgency. He stood alone, near the boundary sign that read, Ashwood National Forest, the letters chipped and faded. Beyond it, figures in white suits moved methodically, lifting soil-bagging remains, photographing fragments of bone and rusted metal. The agents didn't look at him, though some recognized his face from the initial reports. They called him the Whistleblower Ranger, the man who had cracked open a half-century of secrets. He didn't feel like a hero. He only felt tired. Days passed, and the investigation deepened. Forensics confirmed that many of the recovered remains belonged to men and women listed as missing between 1969 and 1985. But then came the twist that chilled even the hardened investigators. Several DNA samples matched individuals who were supposedly long dead, whose official deaths had been recorded decades earlier. Yet their genetic traces appeared in new, recent biological samples recovered from the facility. The implications were staggering. Whatever had begun in those woods had never truly ended. Elias learned of it from a federal agent who spoke off-record near the mobile command tent. "Somebody kept it going," the man said, eyes darting toward the trees. "We just don't know who, or what for." He offered no further explanation. The next morning, the agents began closing sections of the forest, marking them with orange tape. Satellite crews arrived, digging equipment hummed through the night, and the old correctional camp was finally unearthed, completely, its foundations cracked open like a tomb. The smell of earth and decay lingered even in the cold wind. Elias watched from the distance, coat pulled tight, the brim of his hat shadowing his eyes. The forest he had once guarded now looked alien under floodlights. When the last truck pulled away and the reporters dispersed, the silence returned. Dusk settled heavy and damp. The outlines of tents and machinery faded into the mist. Elias stayed. He walked the boundary line until the hum of engines vanished entirely, and replaced again by the steady whisper of leaves. The air smelled of pine resin and distant rain. He stopped at the same ridge where he had first seen the nest weeks ago. The clearing lay empty now, its soil churned and dark. For a moment he thought he saw movement, a shift of color among the trees. He stepped closer, the wind brushing cold against his face. Then he saw it. Nestled between two young pines was another structure. Smaller, newer. Fresh branches woven tightly resin, glistening where the wood had been stripped. A nest alive with the smell of sap, and something faintly metallic. Elias's heart tightened. He approached slowly, crouching to study it. The weave was the same deliberate human-like, yet not entirely human. The pattern repeated the first one perfectly. He felt the wind stir, carrying a low sound through the trees. It might have been the creak of branches, or a breath, or a whisper. He straightened, scanning the shadows beyond the clearing, half expecting to see movement. Nothing. Only the forest, endless and unknowable. For a long time he stood there, the light fading around him until the hum of generators far behind became a memory. Somewhere deep within those woods, life, or something like it, was continuing the work that had started decades ago. He didn't know if it was human hands, or the echo of what humans had made, but he knew this much truth had come to light. Yet the darkness remained patient and unfinished. The wind carried the faint scent of pine smoke from the excavation site, mingling with the damp breath of the forest. Elias looked toward the trees, one last time, his voice barely a whisper. Some parts of the woods, he said, were never meant to be uncovered. Then he turned away, swallowed by mist as dawn broke over Ashwood. If this story kept you on edge, don't forget to subscribe for more chilling tales from the hidden heart of America. What do you think was really behind the nests in Ashwood Forest? Share your thoughts below and tell me where you're watching from.